From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi again and welcome to the show and a happy new year to you from all of us here at Chicago Newsroom. As we tape the show today, a lot of France is still in lockdown and the search continues for that brutal bunch of criminals who wiped out much of the editorial staff at Charlie Hebdo. We have become so hardened to these vicious and inscrutable crimes that this one just feels like another one in some ways, but it is different in a very important way. It really threatens to make us fearful of speaking critically in public. And on this morning after, we all need to pledge not to surrender to a few monsters with powerful guns. We've got to agree to keep talking, to keep criticizing, to keep satirizing, even from puny little meaningless shows like this one, all the way up to The Daily Show, from Rush Limbaugh to Bill Maher, from blogger moms to Rupert Murdoch's empire. We have to do the thing we do, keep talking, criticizing, challenging the government, challenging corporations, challenging religions that all govern our lives. I love the fact that the editor-in-chief of that satire magazine said after his offices were firebombed only a couple of years ago that he'd just carry on. I prefer to die standing than living on my knees. That's what he said. Anyway, on today's show, an author who has always offered some controversial positions for our consideration. He's now out with a new book arguing that our economy, our culture, and in fact our whole nation needs a healthy, organized labor sector in order to grow and prosper. Actually, more than to prosper, I think Tom Geoghegan would argue it's to survive. As I read Only One Thing Can Save Us, I couldn't help making a kind of a clumsy, perhaps, comparison to the ecology of the world's forests. You know, they seem like tranquil, serene places of exquisite beauty when we go into them and visit them, but they're constantly being disrupted by disease, storms, fire, flood. And it's taken us a century to learn that just one of those things alone, just take fire, for example, is critical to forest health. We started doing everything we could to suppress fire, and now we know that we made those forests very vulnerable to massive conflagrations in time of drought and so forth. And I couldn't help but think that that's kind of what this labor economy that Tom Geoghegan is describing in this book is so parallel to, if that all makes sense. If you agree that organized labor plays a crucial role in moderating and disrupting our world economy and that labor representation needs to be revived, is it too late? Are the jobs gone? Is the labor representation over, Tom? So glad to have you on the show.
Thank you, Ken.
Congratulations.
No, it's not too late.
Good. And I don't know if my clumsy, awkward analogy really does mean anything, but it does say something to me about there being a cycle, there being an ecology, and economies are like that.
Well, of course, and there are many variables, and one of them is aggregate demand. And that means paying people, as Henry Ford used to do, $5 a day to make the cars so that they can go out and buy the cars. And as you know, I analogize the situation today where business is paying people $4 a day and lending them $1 at 20% interest to do the buying.
Right.
An economy that isn't rewarding people based on their increased productivity is an economy that is going to rely upon people going into debt, and an economy that relies, and even countries going into debt, including our own, trade debt. And an economy that keeps going into debt, Ken, is going to be an economy that is going to have shocks that come periodically, like 2008, 2009. It could happen again.
Yeah. One of the things that I know we will dip into and visit and revisit 1,000 times on the show today is the 1%, the extreme oligarchy that seems to have control of our economy today.
Sure.
And a point that you make several times in the book that I think is just so critical is that when you amass so much money that you just really don't have any place to spend it anymore. You've bought all the yachts you can possibly buy. You're sitting on this pile of money and you got to do something with it. And you kind of have two choices. You could invest in your industries, you could buy new machinery, expand your industry, or you could loan that money.
Or you could put it into the, as John Maynard Keynes argued, you can either put it in the construction of durable goods, which is what he meant by manufacturing and the real economy, or you could put it in the savings, by which he meant financial speculation of one kind or another. And the economic problem, as Keynes defined it, and that's why I think he's, in fact, not just the great apostle of social democracy as he is, but really somebody who would argue for a labor movement today, is that he saw that the key is to getting the rich to invest in the right things. And we can't do that if we've got a system that is set up where working people in this country don't have enough money without going into debt, without going into savings, without getting the money loaned to them from the rich to buy these goods. We just can't, we're going to come, well, like in 2008, we're going to come crashing down. Yeah, unstuck.
If I were a trillionaire and I had, just more money than I knew what to do with, you're arguing that, yeah, I could build another plant, I could employ another 1,000 people, but it's a lot easier and more lucrative to take that money and finance their credit cards.
Of course.
So if I get 25% return every time they buy a $50 DVD player or something, I'm making more money than I would make with that plant.
Or to buy back the stock of my own company, which then goes up and then gives me, the CEO, a big payday. There are all sorts of ways in which we have deregulated finance, and that is a function of labor's weakness. A social democratic society would at least, let me put it this way. It's extremely important to keep in mind the principle of usury. And usury laws were defended by Keynes and others, and you can use usury to cover a whole gamut of things, from Glass-Steagall Act, everything else, to discourage the investment in financial interests in instruments and put it into the construction of durable goods. One thing that I didn't talk about in this book, for example, which would be a great way of encouraging investment, is to have a single payer system where business wasn't paying healthcare costs. So you would be lowering relatively that kind of labor cost and encouraging a bigger return in the employment of people and the construction of durable goods that we could sell abroad and bring down our trade deficit. All of these things that Keynes was talking about. And one of the things I try to do in this book, as you know, is to try to look at three real great apostles of what I think is the social democratic progressive tradition. And one of them is Keynes, one is John Dewey, one is Martin Luther King. But Keynes is important because he understood that economies don't get wages right.
That's a bookmark that we have to revisit that. Economies don't get wages right.
We underpay people. That's one of the reasons you have to have fiscal stimulus in a recession to get demand up again. And the other great thing about Keynes is that he felt it was very important that we encourage investment out of the financial sector, which is ballooning here, and into manufacturing and durable goods and other things, which we could do in a bigger scale. I mean, the Germans have 25% of their GDP from manufacturing. We have 9%. That's a function of financial deregulation and the weakness of labor and weakness of a progressive movement in this country that can force investment into these sorts of things.
So go ahead.
Well, that's the argument for bringing back a labor movement. So how does labor tie into this? If you look at the really great success stories in terms of competitiveness, there are Germany, Netherlands, Scandinavia, all these countries that run big trade surpluses. Germany, a whopping trade surplus, bigger than China's even. How did the Germans get there? Why are they investing in durable goods and not in financial instruments? Certainly not because of wages. They're paying higher wages than we are. They have a corporate structure that is different from ours. It's not accountable to shareholders who really aren't. Our structure now isn't accountable to shareholders, Ken, but it's not accountable to anybody except the CEOs and the managers. it's at least partially accountable to the workers who have made decisions to invest their lives in these companies and have positions, privileged positions of power within the companies.
Actually, seats on the board. In
seats
some
on the
cases.
board of directors, works councils where all these people are elected by workers, and the managers have to reach agreements with them in just the day-to-day running of the plant. They have a system of corporate democracy that orients that economy to the construction of durable goods, to manufacturing, to a much more competitive in a global sense kind of economy than we have. So you have to change the corporate structure, and that requires, and to get there, to get to a stakeholder model, stakeholder type corporation, you need to revive a labor movement to do that.
And that, of course, is the essence of the book. It's the one, that is the one thing that can save us.
Yeah.
Is that, because this is such a global conversation, literally global, I have to resist the temptation to just go all over the place and talk about all kinds of things. But you did bring up the single-payer system, and it's interesting that you mentioned that it's not really a part of this book. But I had the great privilege last year of being able to go for 3 weeks back to London, where I was born. I was there. I was only there till I was about 7 years old, and met with family members that I literally have not seen in 55 years. They're all old people like me now, and they were kids when I last saw them.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting to make the comparison that their quality of life seems calmer and better than ours. And I couldn't put my finger on it until one day we were just sitting out in somebody's back garden talking. And he said, well, I think the difference between us and you is that I never have to worry about, if I have to have a hip replaced. I just go to the hospital and they do it. And I said, well, from what I understand from John Boehner and people in our Congress, your people are all just sitting around dying in the emergency rooms because of, we can have this conversation for hours. But the point is, these are economies where that important piece is taken off the table.
Yes.
And it works.
And that would be very helpful here. But what's more helpful is really to change our style of corporate government.
Right.
And I think that if we look at, Europe has a bad rap these days, but if you look at Northern Europe, that's very competitive, doing very, very well. And they have a different corporate structure. And they have a middle class. If you look at the income distribution in Germany compared to the United States, it just blobs out in the middle, and ours is sort of shrinking and going this way. That's because ordinary people have some right to participate in making decisions over there. It's limited right. I don't want to exaggerate it, but it's some right, whereas people here can. College graduates coming out now, college graduates. I'm not talking about Kelly girls. I'm not talking about undocumented workers lining. College graduates are temps. Working at high-skilled jobs. They don't even have employers.
They're
really.
independent contractors, I think is what you mean to say, right? Yeah. And also they have $98,000 in college debt.
They have $98,000 in college debt.
Right.
And we're not talking about Macy's. We're talking about big companies like Abbott Labs and so forth now. If corporations have so little stake in people that they can get rid of them, they don't even have to fire these people anymore.
Right. Because they've never hired them in the first place.
People are on their own. Nobody's investing in them.
Right.
And they're going nowhere. They're stuck. That's what we've got to change. That's what a labor movement could change.
So then the obvious question is, yes, it would seem that a good, well-grounded, well-founded labor movement in the United States could begin to address some of these big issues. It could raise the wages. It could address the income disparity. It could begin to rebuild the middle class. So why isn't it happening?
Well, our labor laws make it impossible to organize. But in addition to that, I'm not talking about resuscitating organized labor as it now exists. Any labor movement that comes back in this country is going to have to fit into this whole notion of giving people more power. It's going to have to, a labor movement that comes back in this country is going to have to let people go and make their own decisions and be their own labor movement. And one way of explaining that is, again, looking at the German European system, where you have works councils that aren't dominated or controlled by the unions, but are elected by everybody in the plant, not just the hourly workers, but the middle managers. Everybody is involved. It's not adversarial. That kind of labor movement where organized labor is still out there arguing about the money, but in terms of trying to dictate what is going on inside the plant, it's not trying to micromanage, but it is trying to change the corporate structure so that the people themselves directly can do the micromanaging.
Okay, so you have many facets to your prescription for how to begin
that's
this.
One.
That's one. But I mean, I guess the part that's really frustrating to me is there's something I'm not getting. It's exactly as you say. Corporations have never been at a more advantageous position than they are now, that workers are just simply widgets. They're just simply interchangeable parts. They can keep them as long as they want, throw them away because there's 50 people waiting for that job. Why do we not have a more effective labor movement in the United States today? You say it's partly because of laws. Is it also because there's just a kind of a general malaise, a kind of a giving up? Like, no, I'm never going to be able to beat, pick one, General Electric, General Motors, whatever it is.
We have three big problems in this country.
Only three?
Only three.
Okay, well, let's hear
Three
them.
gigantic problems.
Okay.
One is we have a political model that is gridlocked. It can't make decisions.
We've
it
noticed
can't
that.
pass
Yeah,
laws.
yeah.
It can't increase Social Security. It can't do single payer. It can't act in a majoritarian way. We have a corporate structure that is dysfunctional. It's no longer stockholder accountable. It's not accountable to anybody. And it exists to pile up huge amounts of return for the 1% and the managers and have the easy life and speculate in financial things instead of real things. And we have a labor movement that can't organize. It has to get 50% of everybody, 50% plus one, to have the system of exclusive representation, which a lot of people look upon as one more damn thing that's imposed upon them from the outside. So what's the answer? The answer is we've got to mobilize more people into the political system. To do that, well, you had the civil rights movement doing it in the 60s. Now you need a revived labor movement so that you don't have 35% of the American public, or the American electorate voting in midterm elections, but something that's more like 50%, and in a presidential election, 75%. You need to break that gridlock by bringing more people into the system. You need a labor movement to do that. Labor can't organize on that scale in this current model of exclusive representation, where you have to get the majority, where you have to go through a single federal agency in Washington, D.C. to get an appropriate bargaining unit, where you have to go out and sell this to a majority.
It's all been bureaucratized.
We have to organize the way the Europeans do, which is, if you've got a group, it may be 30%, 40%, not necessarily majority. Bargain for that group, and not bargain in the exclusive representation mode where you're trying to impose contracts and rules on everybody else who isn't in the union. Just bargain for your 30% or 40%. Bargain for higher wages. Bargain. And to do that, you're going to have to, you need a labor movement that's willing to disrupt.
Disrupt is a key word
yes,
here. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right, so you're in a...
That's what we need. Look, you can't stop this increased inequality that is going on in this. You can't stop the dials and the gears the way they're going right now through the Constitution. The Constitution is designed to shut down the government from doing anything about this. When something like this happens, and I'm a moderate, Ken. I go to church on Sunday. I'm a very responsible taxpayer. I look both ways before I cross the street. I don't like disruption generally.
Just say you're a labor lawyer.
I'm a union side labor lawyer nonetheless. We need more disruption in the country. You saw that in the fast food thing, and which shot up minimum wage to the top of the political agenda, which it now is. You need more of that.
You, of course, use the CTU as a good
And
example
the Chicago
of
Teachers Union strike.
pretty heavy disruption.
And it's not necessary always to win. You can win by losing. Martin Luther King knew that. Go out there and lose. Force the national political parties, and especially the Democratic Party, to declare itself.
I don't want to lose track of this idea because it seems disruptive, actually. You're talking about you could go into a plant that is not organized, and you could organize 30%, 300 of 1,000 workers, and say, it's almost like right to work. I mean, it's like saying, we don't have to collect dues from the other 700 people. We'll collect them from this 300, and this 300 people will make noise. This 300 people will disrupt.
And sometimes 200 more who aren't paying dues will walk out with them.
Maybe. But the part I don't understand is, can't the plant just simply kick you right out the door when you begin to disrupt? Why not?
Well, here's what they can do legally. Let's talk about what they can do legally. Legally, they can permanently replace you if you haven't come back to the job. But if you walk out for 1 hour and they haven't gone out and run ads in the Sun-Times and the Tribune or even online saying we're hiring people, blah, 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 and you come back after your 1 hour strike, which is say, I don't want to pick on Starbucks, but 8:30 in the morning at a Starbucks, they have to take you back. Now, it's true that the employer could violate the law and say, I'm not taking you back anyway. But you go through the NLRB, and there are some employers that would do that. And then the question is whether you can up the ante in terms of disruption. How easy is it to replace your workworkforce like that? It's a big pain in the neck.
It sounds like a full employment thing for lawyers.
Well, not necessarily. I hope it isn't. But not everybody will do that. So what you're trying to do is look at the areas where that does make a difference and use your leverage and take advantage of the fact that if you're only representing 30%, Ken, you don't represent everybody in the plant, which means you don't have to get the people who are sheep necessarily to sign on to this.
And I think it's a very good point, because that's part of what I would say has been hamstringing union representation for a long time, is that if you're supposedly representing all of the workers in a class in a plant, you can't, because many of them listen to talk radio and don't agree with what you're doing.
A German labor staffer said, and they have the strongest, most democratic labor movement that I know of. A German labor staffer once told me, if we had to get 50% plus one to vote in the first place, we'd have no unions in Germany.
But the way I understand the history of labor movements, though, is that it's built on mass. Isn't mass where power comes from?
It's built on
You have to be able to say, hell no, you will not do this because we will not let you.
Look at Wisconsin and Scott Walker, and look at other situations around the country. Democracies don't vote in a labor movement. What happens is that a militant group stands up and takes an action, and the rest of the population, I don't mean to be very scathing here or condescending, but let me be condescending and scathing. Most people are sheep. It's just, we don't want to, it's not that they're against it, it's just, hey, I've got my life to live, I've got other things to do, I can't do this, I wish you guys well, but count me out. That's where most of the country is. That's why you've got to create a kind of labor model where you can take advantage of the people who are militant, because I can tell you one thing as a union side labor lawyer. All this talk about the United States, workers are blah, 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 and they're disengaged. Well, most are, but a lot of them aren't. We have a lot of terrific working people who have this sense of service for others, who want some meaning in their lives, who want to put themselves out. They're out there, and they're all over the place. They're not 50% plus one, but they're 20%, 30%. Let's take advantage of their energies.
I'm sorry to jump around, but another major question that I have for you is, the perception that I have, and I think a lot of others do, that what you really get down to is there are fewer jobs than there are people on the planet. And in our country, that is becoming a much more stark reality. There just aren't enough jobs. We don't make stuff anymore. I mean, you know, my parents lived north in Kedzie, and there were factories within 3 or 4 blocks. You could work for 2 weeks in this factory and 3 weeks in that factory.
Let me tell you another problem. That it's not that there are necessarily more people living on the planet; they're living longer. So people my age, your age, are
right.
out there working,
Right.
And younger people in their 20s and 30s
Right.
are on hold,
Wanting us to die.
You know, if we get out of the way, they can move up.
Yeah.
So I think it's to some extent there are too many people, not enough jobs. There are not. There may be not enough. There may be too many jobs. You know, I mean, there may be. We should have a system where, as you said in UK, you know, people are sort of have peace of mind because they can get health care. You know, go over to Northern Europe and you see real peace of mind because they have savings and they can retire at age 65, et cetera. And I don't mean for people to go on idle after that. I mean, there's lots of good things you can do in your life if you go out and do things to try to limit the amount of public squalor in the world. But the question is it's not so much the number of jobs, it's what these jobs are worth and whether they can support families and whether they are sufficient to create a kind of savings base so people can retire.
But you know, as we come down to our last couple of minutes, I have to say that I find this is the part where it gets really frustrating to me, because we don't make stuff anymore. I mean, machines make stuff. And I'm a little bit persuaded by some of the arguments on the right that if you organize the workers at McDonald's has hundreds of billions of dollars in the bank. They'll automate those plants in a day, and then they won't need any people at all.
But technology is dynamic. It's always innovating, and there's always technology that creates jobs at the same time. So let me put it this way.
You get the last minute.
We are skewed towards technology that doesn't employ people because we don't like to employ people. We have I use Germany as another example. We have maybe 12% of our workforce in manufacturing. They have 25% of their workforce in manufacturing. They're much more technologically innovative than we are. It's that in the US, the whole impetus is towards that kind of technology that doesn't employ people versus that kind which where people are dispensable because they don't have any skills versus a skilled workforce.
Technology that improves our lives. Technology alternate energy.
We're skewed away from the kind of technology that requires skilled people to do it, and innovation coming up from working people at the bottom.
Yeah,
that's the difference.
You have 20 seconds left.
I
won't say another word. Fill it.
There's only one thing can save us. In this, the only thing that can save us is not a labor movement itself. That's a means to an end. The only one thing that can save us is a more democratic way of life, in the workplace, in the schools, in the polity generally. That's what this book is arguing for, and it has some ideas about how to get there.
Tom, I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I really enjoyed the book, too. Only one thing can save us. It's available right now. Tom Geoghegan, our host, our guest, and I'm the host. He's the guest today.
He's definitely the host.
And you have been watching Chicago Newsroom. Thanks so much for coming. I hope you come back again.
Thank you, Ken.
Come some other time. We'll carry on this discussion. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It is a community service of CAN TV, and of course you can find us here on cable, as you well know, but you can also watch us online at this address any old time. And what you should do is you should take this show and send it to your friends and have them understand what's going on, okay? Or listen to us on iTunes, too. I'm Ken Davis. We'll be back next week with, we'll talk next week about politics and the election, because that's what's really happening right now, huh? See you next week. Bye.